We're back with another episode of App Stories. Today's episode is brought to you by Memberful. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Vitici. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. You know, we had a really good conversation in the pre-show all about the Vision Pro. Talked a little bit about where we stand in the delivery process, but also what it means for computing beyond just using the Vision Pro for entertainment. So if you're interested in listening to that conversation, you can subscribe to App Stories Plus by going to appstories.plus or becoming a Club Premier member by going to plus.club. All right, Federico, let's dig into some workflows that we've been working on because, you know, we're in this winter period, and normally I'd say this time of year is a little slower for us, and we have time to really refine our workflows and see, you know, fix things that aren't working, maybe try some new ideas. It's a little different this year because with the Vision Pro around the corner, we've been kind of busy, but you and I both had some time over the holidays to do a little of this. And I thought maybe we'd talk today about some of the things that we've been experimenting with to maybe give people some ideas of things they might want to try.
Yeah, I want to start. I want to know about this Obsidian organization system that you have going. Like, what is this?
All right. Well, I'm going to try to paint you a word picture here.
Okay.
Because I'm sitting here working in Obsidian, looking at my notes for this episode. So it makes it very easy. And on that left sidebar where you've got the navigation, I have reorganized it thoroughly during the holidays. I have created something that is based on a methodology called the Johnny Decimal System, although it's not really that. I will put a link in the show notes. It's kind
the John Decimal. It's
a little different. I mean, I think it's an interesting concept. It's one of these approaches to being organized and being productive. And I think it has a lot of benefits, but I haven't really adopted it wholesale. And I've adapted it to my own needs because it's to me, it feels like more of a project-oriented methodology and very focused on files and things like the Finder. And one of the important insights that I had over the holidays was that the vast majority of my work happens inside of Obsidian in one way or another, whether it's writing something for the website or whether it's creating show notes for one of the podcasts, or it's just, you know, organizing various projects that you and I are working on. So I decided to really create an Obsidian first system that's basically based on shallow folders and a numbering system. So there are only 2 layers of folders in this system. The top level is what you might think of as things like areas in an app like Things. And the second layer is more project-oriented. So the top layer is broken down into just areas of responsibility, basically. Things like Mac Stories, the club, podcasts, Mac Stories Inc., which is just kind of like general businessy stuff, sponsors, and then I have one for personal. And so those are just very, very broad categories. And I've assigned each of those a range of numbers. So for instance, for Mac Stories, it's 10 through 19, so that when you open up that folder, you will see a bunch of subfolders that start with 10 and go to 19. So up to 10 folders inside of there. And each of those is divided into particular projects that I'm working on. And I try to keep it to no more than those. I mean, occasionally I will allow for another folder inside one of those folders, but at the very maximum, it's 3 levels and usually just a couple of levels because that's typically all I need. And what's nice about that is you don't end up drilling down a lot. And there's a couple of things going on here. The numbering system allows for me to sort alphabetically and for these folders to always be in the same order based on the numbering system, no matter what the letter is that project starts with, which is very nice because it makes it easy to navigate and because things aren't always changing depending on how you've got it sorted. Let's see. What else do I do? I also have something called a system folder, which is like the metadata of this whole system. It's got scratchpad notes for each week of the year. It's got templates that I use for various projects. It's got a few other reference notes, things like that. And I'm finding that this is working really well. I mean, the numbering thing is really for the sorting only. I don't really have like these numbers, or I don't have them memorized by any means, but it does help with searching sometimes. So, for instance, if I know something's in Mac stories, I can just start typing Mac stories, and all I'm ever going to see are the first 9 folders, at least at the top level, with numbers in them in the search results. So it's very easy then to find the folder beneath that I need, or I can just click away around in the navigation system as an alternative to that, which works
So
pretty well.
would you say that you use the keyboard like to access those folders, like with search results? Is that how you typically navigate this structure more than clicking in the sidebar?
Yeah, I would say I use the sidebar about 3/4 of the time, because one thing that's nice about Obsidian is you have a button up at the top of that navigation bar where you can collapse everything very quickly or expand everything very quickly. And so I tend to collapse it down. And when I collapse it down, all I see are those folders. And those folders each have an icon using the Iconize extension plugin that gives me a little visual cue as to what each one is. Like Mac Stories is a bookmark, of course. And then I just click through, because it's only usually 1 or 2 clicks to get to the file that I want at that point. And then I use, when I start a new note.
Yeah, that's okay. That was my next question. So you have an idea for Mac Stories,
Yeah,
and maybe it belongs to an existing project, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's a new idea. What do you do?
So I do one of 2 things. If I'm in a hurry, I just create a new note and it goes to the root of my vault, which means in this system.
So it's like an inbox.
Yes, it works just like an inbox. So they float to the bottom in that situation, because everything above it is numbered and sorted accordingly. So the folders are at the top, the random files are at the bottom, and periodically I just go through and I move them. I have a hotkey set up for the move functionality, and I either do it that way by typing in the folder that I want and hitting enter, and then it just automatically goes there, or I use drag and drop. It really depends. But if I have, if I'm not in a rush and it's something that I've kind of sat down to work on a particular project, maybe it's something that I already set up a couple of days before, and I know that this new note is going to go into that project, I just, right click on the folder that I created for that project, create new note, and put it in there. And do it that way, so I don't have to go through the moving things around part of it later. I had been doing some auto moving of notes before, and I found that I didn't like not having the control over where things went.
Right. Okay.
So I changed that. I'm not using that really much anymore. I am using properties to help with some of this.
Okay. So metadata inside of these notes.
Exactly. So, the new properties feature that was rolled out in Obsidian not that long ago, I tend to add a handful of different properties at the top of every note now. One is a created date and a modified date, because that just helps for kind of searching and sorting at times. And then whether it's a working file or a reference file, and sometimes whether it's an active file. So
okay, interesting. All right.
And those are just checkboxes. So for instance, if something's a reference file, to me that means a reference note. That means this is something that I want to look at later. Maybe I got a piece of information that I know I'm going to need again in a month or a year or whatever it is. And I call it a reference. I tick off the box for the reference note, and I keep it in a reference folder. Every one of these areas has its own reference section, and I keep the reference files in there so I can get to them quickly and easily.
So let's say, for example, that one day you ask me a question and you're like, "Hey, Ticci, how do I embed a Mastodon post in an article on Mac Stories?"
Right.
And I give you the explanation. It's like, okay, you got to use such and such piece of code. You take that snippet of code and you save a note for it as a reference note in Obsidian, right?
Yep.
2 months pass. You got to embed a Mastodon post in an article again. How do you find it?
Search.
Okay.
Usually search for
Okay.
that kind of stuff, because what I'll do is I'll dump that. In that example, I would take the syntax, I'd paste it into a note with a quick sentence or two that says, this is how, this is how you embed a Mastodon
Okay.
post in Mac Stories. And so then I'll just search for Mastodon Mac Stories, something like that, and it'll pop up. Because it's in a reference folder, I can dig around and find it. And I'm trying to
Right.
keep these folders fairly lean if I can.
Hmm.
And I'm
So
archiving when stuff is no longer relevant.
so one of the strengths, like the system is to an extent predicated upon the quality of your keywords when you're saving a note. So
Yes,
like you have to be as descriptive as possible
I do.
when you are okay. Interesting.
Yeah, so
Interesting.
this is one of the things where it's a little different than this Johnny Decimal system, which is very much based on the file structure and the numbering
Browsing the file structure.
and browsing that. And to me, that throws out some of the baby with the bathwater, in that search is powerful. And if I can help search by not having too many notes, and by having the notes in places where I kind of know where they are generally to begin with, it makes it a lot easier to find things again.
Interesting. Interesting. So the benefit for you in this case is you have this sort of common structure for all your folders. So typically, like when you name them 1, 2, 3, 4, like you tend to follow the same order for things.
I do. I try to, for instance, if it makes sense to have a reference folder, I try to make that the first one. So
Right,
that
right.
whenever I open one of these top level things, I open up Mac Stories, the first thing I see is reference. The second thing I see is research, because and those are common with the club too, because I'm doing that a lot for both of those projects. But below that, once you get beyond that, I've got things like events or ideas or the Mac OS review, things that are unique to Mac Stories. But I do keep a few folders that are the same in each one of these, like reference, research, and archive.
Okay. Well,
Now,
this sounds cool.
I have a couple other things I want to tell you about this.
Okay.
One is, the nice thing about those properties and having things like working file or active is that I can then use data view to create lists of what are the active
Right.
files and what are the working files. Then I
Right.
can very quickly open those up and delete them if they're not, a working file to me is something that should be deleted eventually. It's a draft of a story, and when it's published, I delete it now. I do the same thing with a lot of my research notes. I don't keep that
Mm.
stuff,
Yeah.
because like the research notes, it's, usually it'll be like, maybe it's some text that I copy out of an email from a developer that has information about a particular release. But once the release is out, that's not relevant to the next time I write about that app. So I move on and delete that. So that's one of the things I'm doing as well.
Okay. I am fascinated by this because I feel like I have so many notes in Obsidian, and they're not really particularly well organized. So
It took a while to do this. And you
interesting.
know what I did? I mean, here's the strategy I took, because I had 3,500 notes, Federico, and now I have like 400. And what I did was I went through and very quickly found the ones that I thought would be relevant going forward in the new year, and I kept those in Obsidian. I moved everything else into a different folder on my Mac, and figured if I had to, I can go into the Finder, and because it's just plain text, I can search in the Finder and find things that I might need to bring back into the vault. And I've done that a handful of times, maybe 5 or 6 times so far. That folder still has a couple of thousand notes in it, and I'll just keep them there, or I'll delete them eventually once I feel like I'm past their shelf life. But
Hmm.
that worked really well, because it was a little bit like inbox
Hmm.
bankruptcy with email. I was able to start with a much smaller set of notes and then go through, figure out what I wanted for my top level folders, what I wanted for my next level of folders, and then
Got it.
just organized what I have now and what I need now. And as I did that, there were some things I thought, oh, I really don't need this, and I would get rid of it, and I would clean it up as I went. And now I'm kind of at the point where I'm only creating folders when I need to, and there's something new that I'm working on that really is going to be something I think I'll have more than a couple of notes in.
Got it. Got it. Well, maybe I should try something like this. It's interesting.
It's been fun. It's worked pretty well. I'm using folder DB too to start trying to do a little bit of organizing around creating databases for some of the things that I track, that's a really interesting plugin. And I have only just scratched the surface creating tables of, like sponsor schedules and things like that.
Did you see that it seems like the Obsidian folks, well, first of all, I think they're going to work next on really improving the mobile experience on iPhone and iPad.
I saw that. Thank goodness. Yeah. I was starting to wonder about whether they were going to even bother with it anymore.
Yeah. But it also seems like they're working on a native replacement for data view. I think they call it smart views or something like that, which I think is a really clever idea to have a better, like sort of like when they did, there's a bunch of instances where they took an existing plugin and they simplified it and they made it more, like, for example, even if you look at properties, which is an extension of what was already possible with the YAML syntax.
Yeah, I think it has a better UI.
Exactly. I think there's a ton of potential for really building custom views in Obsidian without having to know the complex data view query syntax.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, data view is really hard. And I mean, I'm just doing really simple stuff with it right now, and that's all I really need, but I would like to do something a little more complex down the road. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Memberful. Memberful is best-in-class membership software used by the web's biggest creators, publishers, and media companies. We use it here at Mac Stories every single week for Club Mac Stories, and we love it. We've been using it for years and years. And if you're building a membership website for a client, Memberful handles all the hard stuff so you can complete your builds quickly and your clients can focus on creating content while earning revenue with ease. Memberful protects members-only content and allows site owners to select which subscribers get access to protected areas of your website using server-side content protection. It seamlessly integrates with WordPress and features a host of shortcodes and built-in WordPress functions so you can insert dynamic links and integrate Memberful data with your WordPress theme. Plus, Memberful has built-in connections with popular tools like MailChimp, Discord, and Google Analytics, so site owners can reach and monetize their existing audience without rebuilding their entire tech stack. With Memberful, your clients always have full control and ownership of their audience and their brand. The software also maintains GraphQL API, webhooks, and OAuth single sign-on to make integration even easier. Memberful has everything your client will need to run a membership program, including a streamlined and powerful checkout system, an easy-to-use member portal, transactional emails, and a member management dashboard. Memberful's analytics give your clients an easy-to-use, in-depth view of what's working, what's not, and where to double down. Help your clients monetize their passion. Get started for free today by visiting memberful.com/appstories. That's memberful.com/appstories. Our thanks to Memberful for their support of the show.
All right. Well, I don't have an all-encompassing workflow like John's complete restructuring of his Obsidian Vault. I have a literally a grab bag of little workflows that I've been experimenting with.
Okay, let's hear it.
So the first one, pretty easy one. I've been fascinated by the Omnivore Read Later app. Yep. Instead of good links. So if you are by any chance, if you're part of the Omnivore Discord, you may have seen a feature request by me in the feature requests channel in which I requested better shortcuts actions for Omnivore. And the developer was kind enough to listen to my feedback and my suggestions and incorporate some initial support for shortcuts actions with more to come, hopefully, over the next few weeks. But yeah, so Omnivore, open source read later app that you can also self-host if you're into that sort of thing, but otherwise you can just create an Omnivore account and it's free to use. I don't know when and how the developer plans to make money with Omnivore, but that's a topic for a different time. And the big selling point for me, like the big thing that I realized, I need to check out Omnivore. I found myself on a couple of occasions over the holidays wanting to listen to a quick article, like one from The Verge, one from Gruber on Daring Fireball. When I was driving, Good Links doesn't have a text-to-speech functionality. Omnivore does. And especially if you have access to the ultra-realistic voices that Omnivore has, my goodness, those voices are so good.
Are they? I asked for that, but I haven't gotten it yet.
Yeah, so it's by far the best text-to-speech engine I've ever tried in a Read Later app. I don't want to say that it's like listening to a podcast, but it's very, very close to a generally human-sounding voice.
How do you think they're paying for that if it's open source?
I have no idea. I don't know.
Maybe they'll charge for that part at some point.
I don't know. So I've been using Omnivore to listen to some of those quick articles, like The Verge's first impressions with the Vision Pro. I listened to that in 5 minutes on my way to pick up my girlfriend one day. So that sort of stuff is really useful to quickly catch up on your queue, especially for shorter stories that you want to save for later. And it also helps, of course, that Omnivore is open source and multi-platform, so it really works everywhere. Windows, Android, like you can find the Omnivore app, whatever. And it's also it's a web app, so you can really access it no matter the device you have. I'm sure it'll work on the Vision Pro in Safari. But as I was using Omnivore, I realized, but I missed the shortcuts integration from Good Links. And so I put in a feature request, and the developer listened to me. And so now, just like with Good Links, you can use a shortcuts action that returns the article you're currently reading in Omnivore. And alongside that article variable, it returns properties for the article. So the title, the URL, the publish date, the author, and the name of the website where the article was published. So this, and I believe now the developer is working on extending that integration, because, for example, you cannot retrieve your text selection from an article, but hopefully the developer will implement that soon. So yeah, I've been using Omnivore primarily because of the text-to-speech, which I found useful. And I always resisted these text-to-speech features because they never sounded good, but the Omnivore one really does sound fantastic. So I've been using that to catch up on shorter articles in my queue, usually when driving my car. And that's been useful.
The reason I ask about the price and how they're paying for it is because, I think I talked a little bit about Natural Reader. That service charges $110 a year just for AI voices, which I don't know if they're even as good as the Omnivore ones. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. These AI generated voices don't come cheap necessarily for a lot of these services. I did just check, Federico, that Omnivore is going to be available in compatibility mode with the Vision Pro.
Nice. Another audio-based, I guess this whole workflow today is kind of audio-based. I've been listening to podcasts for the past month at 1.2x speed. I never thought I would become this person. I have become this person. 1.2 is, for me, a good way to save time when listening to podcasts without compromising the natural flow of the conversation. 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 is unlistenable, in my opinion. I know that plenty of people listen at 1.5. Some people listen to podcasts at 2x. Some people listen to podcasts at 3x, which to me is just incredible that they can do that. But 1.2 is the perfect balance, in my opinion. And that has made using the Apple Podcasts app more tolerable. Obviously, the best combination is, in my opinion, Pocket Casts with 1.2 and trim silence on. So you have both time-saving options enabled at the same time. You trim the silence and you speed up the voices. But obviously, Apple Podcasts doesn't have a trim silence feature. I've just been using the 1.2x speed, and that's been okay. I feel like I'm listening to more shows than before because I'm speeding them up, and so I'm saving time. And listening to podcasts via Apple Podcasts has been also part of this final sort of bigger workflow that I've been experimenting with, which is I've been using the Journal app on my phone.
I was surprised when I heard you say this not too long ago, because I didn't think it was kind of your thing.
It's not my thing. I don't feel like I've become this sort of reflective person who journals to look back on his thoughts and emotions and feelings. not because I don't think there's value in that, but because I've never been that kind of person. It's not, I don't know. It's not just something that I think is uh, like a habit for me, but maybe it
Right.
will become one.
Maybe.
Instead, I've been inspired by something that Devon, one of the co-hosts of the Magic Rays of Light podcast on Mac Stories, Devon said, like, using journal as a sort of timeline for your life, like an intentional timeline of your life. And that's an interesting idea, because journal, and this is also like a story idea that I'm working on, sort of like this tentative concept that I have. It's sort of like journal is the universal inbox for Apple devices, in the sense that because it aggregates data from a bunch of different sources, I find it intriguing for me to have a log of the things I've done. So the podcasts I've listened to, the music I've listened to, the workouts that I do, the walks at the park with Sylvia and the dogs that I do, a photo that I take, a phone call that I make with somebody that I haven't contacted in a while. So like bringing these events together and having a timeline that I put together, because you still have to accept those suggestions.
Right.
And making my own log of things that I've done, that's been an interesting use case. And so I have used those suggestions to build a sort of personal timeline. So, like when I listen to the Besties episode about the new Prince of Persia game, and that shows up as a suggestion card in Journal, and I can accept that suggestion and be like, I enjoy this podcast episode, and I found myself agreeing with Justin and his thoughts about Prince of Persia. And I think there's going to be value months, years down the road, if I will ever have to revisit that topic, to be able to search and see, okay, what did I think of that game? And that will be attached to a podcast episode. So if you extend that idea to music, to photos, to locations, it becomes a really modern spin on the idea of like these life logging apps that have been around for a while. But those tend to be automatic, like they assemble a log of your movements and like activity for you. Here, I'm doing it the other way around. The system picks up those activities, but I have to put them together in a journal.
I like this idea a lot, because I was just using one of those automated location tracker apps recently, which is a privacy focused one. But the problem with it is, like, if I stopped across the street, sometimes it would log me as having gone to the shop on the corner
and you really haven't.
When I didn't, I was just waiting for the light to change, that kind of thing. And years ago, I used to use all kinds of automations to export plain text information about my day-to-day life, whether it was backups of old tweets or location data or the weather. I had like this whole integrated API driven thing that would append to a text file. And it just went for like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. I probably have it around somewhere, but I stopped doing that at some point. And this is like a more modern, more interactive version of that. So I don't know, maybe I'll give it a try too. You've kind of sold me on it.
Okay, well, and that's my grab bag of new workflows that I've been trying, sort of all audio based, which I don't know what that says about me. Probably that I spend way too much time in my car. Maybe that's the takeaway.
Probably. I have a tip for you. I don't know if those Apple News, I guess you don't have Apple News in Italy, do you?
Or no, I do not, but I have my US App Store ID, and that works with Apple News.
What I was going to suggest, if you ever find yourself at a loss for podcasts, the Apple News audio stuff that I've talked about on the show before, those episodes work really well as things that you can save in Apple Podcasts if you find a topic that you find interesting. And then when you run out of other shows, like maybe it's the holidays and nobody's recording, like we took a couple of weeks off, you can pull those out and listen to them, because a lot of them are basically like long reads from popular, publications that maybe are 10 minutes long, maybe they're 30 minutes long. And I found a lot of really interesting things there on all kinds of different topics that I just kind of use as the filler stuff when I don't have anything else to listen to.
Oh, nice. All right.
All right, everybody. That's it for this week's episode of App Stories. Don't forget to check out Magic Rays of Light, which we mentioned a couple of times because it's brand new to Mac Stories. You can just go to macstories.net/Magic Rays of Light. There are hyphens between each of those words to go there and subscribe to the show. You can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. Federico is on Mastodon, and so am I. To follow Federico, just go to viticci.macstories.net. And to follow me, go to johnvorhees.macstories.net. We're also on Instagram and Threads, where Federico's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.